Welcome to our second video from the Tapkey How-To series. My name is Eduard Krak. I'm a software developer at Tapkey, and today I will be talking about OAuth 2 Authorization Code Flow, and I will demonstrate it on the .NET 6 Blazor application. Before we get started, I want to emphasize the main difference between Authorization Code Flow and client credentials. For those of you who have seen the webinar or the first part of the How-To series, this should be already clear. For those of you who haven't watched it yet, I recommend to do so. All the links to the videos are in the description of this video. Briefly, in client credentials, your application acts as its own user with its own email, and the owner of the owner account needs to give admin rights to this application or email via my.tapkey.com as for any other administrator. With Authorization Code Flow, on the other hand, the application works on user's behalf, meaning that the owner logs in and agrees that the application can work with his owner account in certain scopes. This is much more scalable, as users can jump in at any point of time by simply connecting the app with their own user. You will see this live today, but before we jump into the code, let's have a look on how does the Authorization Code Flow actually work. If you look at our documentation page at developers.tapkey.io, you will see that there are two options: Authorization Code Flow and Authorization Code Flow with Pixie. In Authorization Code Flow, we're using a client secret that cannot be exposed to the public and therefore must be only used with server-side applications that can hold this information securely. On the other hand, Authorization Code Flow with Pixie is not using a client secret and is used in client-side applications. As we already have an example application with Pixie in our sample app GitHub repository, I will talk about Authorization Code Flow with client secret today. This simple graph shows you the entire process of Authorization Code Flow with client secret. As a first step, the app redirects user to login page of the Tapkey. With this redirect, additional information is sent, like what application is requesting the access, what scopes are required, or where to redirect back after successful consent. At this step, user authenticates himself and negotiates the scopes, as not always all the scopes are required. This, of course, will limit the functionality of the app then. Additionally, you can send a random string called state to improve the security of the request, but I will demonstrate it in our coding session. After user has given the consent, Tapkey Identity Server redirects back to your application with the authorization code and state if it has been used and agreed scopes. The next step is to take the authorization code and together with client secret send it as a post request to Identity Server again. In exchange, an access token is returned, which can be then used with Tapkey Web API to access the protected resources. This was a brief overview of how Authorization Code Flow works. Before implementation, I recommend you to read the documentation on developers.tapkey.io or any other documentation online, as this flow is an official OAuth 2 authorization framework grant type. Enough talking, let's move to Visual Studio. My Visual Studio is open and we can create a new project. I will search for a Blazor app and I'll select the Blazor server app. As I mentioned just a minute ago, as we are using the Authorization Code Flow with client secret, this needs to be a server-side application. Let's select it and call it How-To Web API code.blazor. Click Next. We selected .NET 6 and everything else is left default. The Blazor application has been initialized with some default code here, but to save the time, I already created a template project which already contains the code that we will need for today, and that is not a core part of the Authorization Code Flow. So let's open the project. The new project is loaded and we can see we already have some data here. One of the important ones are the models. So we have a for model that is used in the views and that is really very specific to the application that we are going to use today. And then we have models for the bound log, for the contact, for the owner account, and for the grant. All of them can be found on developers.tapkey.io and have been already used in the how-to series of client credentials and will be provided to you in a GitHub repository with the sample application. Besides the models, I also created the views or the pages that will be used within this application, as these are very technology specific and they are not required to understand the whole authorization code flow. I think now is the time to explain what this application will actually do. For those of you who have seen the how-to client credentials video, it's basically the same application. For those of you who have not seen it, after the successful login and connecting the user to our application, the user will be able to select the owner account he wants to work with, then select the bound log from the selected owner account, and define the email of the user he wants to give a grant to. The grant specification is actually very simple. It will be valid from now on till tomorrow the same time. From the pages I have created the owners page, which lets the user to select an owner account, lets the user to select the bound log, and has an input field for the email address. It also handles all the interaction between changing of a selected owner account of the selected bound log. But what is missing to be implemented is how to reload the owners, how to reload the bound logs, and how to submit or actually save the grant. We can now start the application so you see how it looks like at the beginning. You see, it's just the default looking Blazor application. I changed the first page, so it describes what the application will be able to do. And we have a here, click here to start button that right now does nothing. So it's simple. Let's close it and let's start with the implementation. We have seen the index page, which has an authenticate method, which is happening on the click of the button. And this one should actually start the login process. For handling of the login process, I will create a new class called Auth-Service. And this class will have a method for login. And to use this Auth-Service in the view, in the index view, we will need to inject it via the program. So we will just use the builder services add scoped Auth-Service. This is also very technology specific. So this is the way to build the dependency injection in the Blazor and all ASP.NET Core applications. Let's move to index, inject the Auth-Service here. And call it Auth-Service.login. Await it. Great. Now is the time to implement the login process. To do so, we will open the developers.tapkey.io page, our documentation page, go to Web APIs, Authentication, and Authorization Code. Here is a detailed description on how authorization code works. I really recommend you to read it through. And the first step is the authentication. We see we need to redirect to https login.tapkey.com/connect/authorize, and we need to send the following query string parameters. as URL encoded format. So we need to send the client ID, we need to send the redirect URI, the response mode that defaults to query, we don't need to send it, response type, this must be set to code, the scopes that we will need, and as I mentioned before, we'll also use the state, so an unguessable random string that is used to protect against cross-site request forgery attacks. I will start with creating of dictionary with all the parameters that we want to send. So it will be a string dictionary. The first parameter will be client ID that we don't have yet. We'll define it later. The second one is scope. We'll need to find out what scopes do we actually need. We already did it in how to client credentials, but let's repeat. If we go to operations section at developers.tapkey.io, we'll see all the endpoints that we can use with defined scopes. So if we, for example, open the bound logs, because we will want to retrieve all the bound logs for an owner account, you can see that the needed scope is read core entities. For another endpoint, if we go to owners and we want to get a list of all owner accounts, we see the scope is read owner accounts. So this is how you will find out what scopes you actually need. Let's go back and define what we need. So one is read owner accounts. The second is for read core entities, which is actually for reading of the bound logs. Then for write core entities, to actually write the contacts in case we need them to create a grant, and to write grants. The next one is the redirect URI. So we've seen, and we can see here in launch settings, that the application is starting at localhost with the port 7259. And this is what we are going to use here. Localhost 7259. And we want to return to auth login callback. Response type will be code. And additionally, we want to define the state. So currently we do not have any string, but let's create one strong random one. With random number generator. We convert it to base 64 string. Now we can use it here. Additionally, we need to save this state to verify it when it comes back, and therefore we're going to use the local storage. To get the local storage, we will need to inject it. So let's create a constructor that will expect the protected local storage. Let's import and save it. Now we use this local storage to set the state. This is an async method, so we will await it. As a next step, we'll need to convert this dictionary to form URL encoded string. So let's do it. New form URL encoded content from the, and I have a typo here. Let's rename it. And then convert this content to a string. And now we want to actually redirect to a login tapkey.com. For that, we'll need to use the navigation manager, which is a part of the framework. Navigation manager. Let's add the using. And what we will want to do is use the navigation manager and navigate to, which will be https:/login.tapkey.com/ let's have a look. What was the URL? It's authentication login.tapkey.com/connect/authorize. Connect, authorize, and we will additionally attach the content. Great, this should do it. And we can start with the implementation of login callback. We expect to get back an authorization code and the state. So the first step will be to verify if the state is correct. So we'll again use the local storage, read the state, and then if the previous state was either not found or the values do not equal, we can for now just throw a simple authentication exception. And if it has been valid, we can continue with the new request. So again, I'll create a dictionary of string, and let's have a look, developers.tapkey.io, what is required here. So we will send a post request to login.tapkey.com/connect/token, again for form URL encoded format of parameters, and the parameters will be the following: client ID, client secret, the code, so the code we have retrieved, the grant type, now it will be authorization code, and redirect URI is the same URL that we have used during the authentication phase. So let's define it. First one will be client ID. For now, still I'll use the null. Client secret, again null. Grant type, which will be authorization code. Redirect URI, we'll use the same one as above. Let's paste it here. And the code, which is the code we have retrieved. It needs to be an form URL encoded content, so let's call it post content, new form URL encoded content. And now we will need to make a post request. As we don't have any HTTP client here, we will just ask for it here. So we'll ask for iHTTP client factory. Do the same as before. And now we can use the client factory to create a client. And make a request. So post async with to http login.tapkey.com/connect/token with the post content. We'll wait for the response here. Once we have it, we'll verify that the response was successful. If it was not, we'll just throw invalid operation exception with problem while requesting token. This is a very simplified version of how to handle the errors. I really want to make this clear about how this works and don't want to overdo it with many checks and so on. So this is really straightforward and only counts that everything that we do here will be correct. So once we have the response, we can parse it to a string. Response content, read a string async. And we need to deserialize the access token from it here. For that, we'll create a new model, which will be called token response. And this one will contain access token, expires in, and the token type. Let's go back to auth service. Let's parse this. We used JSON serializer for that. We'll need to import using. Okay. The next step is to save the access token to our local storage so it can be used with Tapkey Web API. And then we'll navigate to an owner's page. You see that I have used multiple constants here that are even repeating in the code, which is not very recommended, and therefore I will create a new class that is called app constants, which will hold these values. So one of them will be the Tapkey authorization server URL, pulling a string, which will be https login.tapkey.com. Another one will be Tapkey API or Web API base URL, which will be https my.tapkey.com. Then we can also define authorization endpoint path. So Tapkey authorization endpoint path, which will be the connect authorize. Then the next one, Tapkey token endpoint path, which will be /connect/token. And then we'll also define constants for the keys in the local storage. So state key, state, and access token key, access token. With this, the code will be much more cleaner. So let's use them here. So let's reuse the state with the app constants dot state key, the URL, we'll have app constants dot Tapkey authorization server URL with Tapkey app constants Tapkey authorization endpoint path. Here we as well reading the state, so use the state key here. Here we can actually use the same as we used here. But here we use the token endpoint path. And here we use the access token. Okay, we have the login callback, but when we get back to our page, it won't automatically trigger the auth service. We'll need to make a page for it. So let's create a new Razor component called login callback. This page will be on the root /auth/login callback. It will inject the auth service. The view is really not important here. It will expect the parameter from query with the name code. And one with the state. Once this page is rendered, we can call the auth service login callback with code and state. What we are still missing here is how we gonna read the client ID and client secret. So let's create the class for configuration as well. Let's call it app config. This will have only two properties, one for client ID and the second one for client secret. During initialization phase, we'll create the app config, where the client ID will be loaded from configuration. get value client ID, and the same will apply for client secret. Once this is loaded, we can provide it as a singleton. And now we can reuse it in our service. So we do the same, app config, great. Now we're gonna provide this value here, app config client ID, and here, and here. If we want to define this client ID and client secret so it appears in the configuration as well, we're gonna use the app settings, and in our cases we are in a development environment. We're gonna use app settings.development.json. We'll define here client ID, currently empty, client secret. Now open portal.tapkey.io, which is our integrator portal where you can define your OAuth clients, identity providers, and all integrator related entities. I'll log in with my user. And I'll select the OAuth client section. I'll create a new OAuth client, which I will call how to auth code.blazor. Define as authorization code with client secret. The logo URL is required. I don't have any. I'll just type something so the logo will be actually broken. The redirect URIs, that's what we have defined in our auth service. Let's copy it from here. Allowed course origins, so that's the URL of our app. And the post logout URIs I'm not gonna define right now. In the next section, we need to define the permissions. So we need to read and write core entities, write grants, and read owners. We can create, and we get back the client ID and client secret. Let's copy these values in our configuration. Let's close the window, and now let's start the application and see if we didn't forget anything. Of course, we used the HTTP client factory, but we didn't register it in our dependencies. So let's stop and let's add builder services at HTTP client and start again. The application has started, so click here to start. And we get back an invalid scope, which means we have something inconsistent in the scopes. So let's close it. Let's have a look if we don't have any typo or anything. Read owner accounts, core entities, write grants. Okay. Let's start again. Hopefully this time everything will work as it should. I'm asked to log in, so I will use Eduard plus how to, even though you can use any user. And now we see that the icon is broken. The how-to auth code blazer, that's the OAuth client we have created, is requesting permission to access your Tapkey account Eduard plus how-to. This will allow this application to read owner accounts, read core data, manage grants. Yes, exactly what we expect. So we allow it. Now it comes back and we are redirected to owner's page. Let's have a look on our local storage and we see that the state and the access token are both successfully saved. The state should have been actually removed because it will be not valid next time, but the access token can be used with the Tapkey Web API. So let's close the application and start with implementation of Tapkey Web API class. In the constructor, we will expect the HTTP client factory because again, we'll need to create client to call the resource server of Tapkey and the protected local storage because we'll need to access the access token. Let's store it. Let's create a helper method with which we will create an HTTP client and initialize it. So let's create a private method which will return an HTTP client. Let's call it get HTTP client. And that one will get the client from the client factory, set the base address. If you remember, we have defined it in the app constants. Will actually need to be URI. We have defined it in app constants as Tapkey Web API base URL. Let's read the access token from the local storage. Local storage get async. Again, we can reuse from app constants access token key. And we'll need to define that we are expecting a string here. And let's set a default request header for authorization with authentication header value, which will be bearer, and access token value. We again expect that access token is there. And in the end, just return the client. Now we can implement the basic methods that we're gonna need. So one is one that will return all owner accounts. We have defined the owner account in the model already, as I mentioned at the beginning. Get all owner accounts. We'll get the client from the method get HTTP client, and then we can actually await the get call to this client. So get from JSON async, which will return the array of owner accounts. From API version 1 owners. Okay, the next method is to return the bound logs array, get all bound logs, and this will be for specific owner account ID. We'll do the same, get the HTTP client, and I can basically copy this. The path will be version 1 / owners / and I can copy it from here. We'll return the bound log array, and the path will be from owners. This actually should be capital. It doesn't matter, it will work with both, but if it's defined with capital, you never know when this will change. And we'll define the owner account ID / bound logs. Okay. And the last method we're gonna need is, we'll just return bool from there, is to create a grant. And here we'll define for which owner account ID it is and the model of the grant. So again, we create HTTP client. We store to a response a post call. So as I mentioned before, all these operations can be found here. If we go to developers.tapkey.io, we'll find grants, create a new grant, and here we have all the description, how it looks like, how it should be structured. Yes, an actual call, and how the owner account ID should look like, how the grant should look like. So let's make a put as JSON async, which will consist from API version 1, owners, owner account ID, grants, and we're gonna put the grant. Then we will return just simply if the response was successful or not. Great, the 3 basic methods are implemented. Let's move to owners page, where we are going to inject the Tapkey Web API. We of course need to define it here as scoped. And then to reload the owners, we will just in the model, that's the for model, call the Tapkey Web API get all owner accounts, and then tell this page that the state has changed. For the bound logs, we will clear what was selected before. So in the model, selected bound log, we'll define the string empty, and if there is any, so is not null or empty, model.selected owner account, because it doesn't make sense to load bound logs for no owner account, we will just call model.boundlogs equals await Tapkey Web API get all bound logs for model.selected owner account. And again, state has changed. For the submit, we will save to a response the Tapkey Web API create grant with the model selected owner account, new grant, which will be So the bound log ID will be model.selected bound log, valid before, which means till when it should be valid is date time now at days 1. We said it will be valid 1 day from now. Valid from, datetime dot now. And for the contact, we'll create a new one. This actually is a workaround because we should actually create a new contact and then create a grant for it. But if you do it this way, if that contact already exists, it will be mapped to that contact. If not, it will create it. So it would be new contact with model.contact email. Then, if the response was successful, we will set the message to the model. So it will appear below the button. If it was successful, grant created successfully. If not, then there was an error while creating grant. And again, we just notify that the state has changed. Okay, let's have a look how the app looks like. If we run it now, there are some errors. Yes, I just forgot the semicolon. Let's start again. We start. Everything already started because I have connected the app before, so the state had been saved in the browser. So select an owner account. I have only one owner account, so I select my logs. Select the bound log. I have only one bound log, so select the main door. And email to create a grant for. So I will create for Eduard plus how to at tapkey.com. Create grant created successfully. Now I can actually go to my.tapkey.com, log in with the how to user and see if the grant is there. So if I open the log main door, I see the access tab that the log can be unlocked by Eduard plus how2, and we can have a look. It's August 15, so exactly today, till August 16. So the app works as expected. Let's do it with a different user right now. I want to show you how easily scalable this application is. I have opened a new window, which is an incognito window, so we can log in again. I'll use continue with email and I'll log in with my different user. This user has also a different login system. Once I'm successfully signed in, I see the consent screen again. It's the same one as we've seen before, but as I've never used this app, I need to give a permission to this app again. I see this is my current email, so I agree. And when I'm logged in, I see my only login system. I select it. I see my free logs in this login system, and I again can create a new grant. So as you have seen, when a new user wants to use your application, you don't need to do anything. There is no action needed from your side. He just logs in, give a consent, and can use the app right away. In this coding session, you have seen how does the authorization code flow work step by step. I assume you will never have to implement this to detail, as there are libraries out there where you just provide the data and everything is done with one call. You should use these libraries because they handle all the edge cases and are much more safer to use. I hope now the difference between client credentials and authorization code flow is even more clearer, and that you can choose the right option for you from it. If there are any open questions from your side, feel free to ask us via stackoverflow.com with tag Tapkey, so the entire community can benefit from it. If you want to become the integrator, do not hesitate to contact us via office@tapkey.com. Thank you for your attention and see you in the next session.